Hey everyone! Today we're going to be looking at 5 of the most twisted family massacre cases you've ever heard.
Marriage can sometimes be a gamble, especially when the seemingly perfect partner you married hides a darkness you never imagined. And Anthony Todt is a chilling example of this nightmare. Convicted of brutally murdering his wife, his 3 children, and their beloved dog, Todt's horror didn't end with the crime. He lived with their bodies for weeks, pretending everything was normal.
Did you guys celebrate Christmas Day?
No, the kids were in bed before Christmas.
When the police finally uncovered the grisly scene, Todt's defense was both bizarre and disturbing. He blamed the crime on his wife, claiming she had been physically and mentally ill and obsessed with reincarnation. He even insisted that his wife wanted the entire family to die together, yet somehow he was the only one left standing. All that's left for us is to question why and what truly happened. This case is not only one of the most high-profile, but also one of the most bone-chilling tragedies ever. So, today we'll take you through the details of this horrific family murder. Anthony Todt lived with his wife Megan and their 3 kids in the picturesque town of Celebration, Florida. In case you didn't know, Celebration was built by the Walt Disney Company and is just a short drive from Disney World Orlando. This place seemed like the perfect setting for a fresh start, with everyone who lived there embodying the epitome of luxury. The Todts had moved there in 2017, leaving behind their home in Connecticut. Anthony, who was 46, worked as a physical therapist and often traveled back to Connecticut for work during the week. On weekends, he would coach local kids in soccer, earning a reputation as a devoted and very responsible dad. On the other side, Megan, who was 42, was a nurturing mother who homeschooled their 3 children, Alec, who was 13, Tyler, 11, and Zoe, who was 4. According to their family, Zoe was full of life, energetic and curious, while Tyler and Alec enjoyed playing piano and reading. Additionally, the Todts were always well-dressed, living what appeared to be a luxurious life. The family also had a beloved dog named Breezy. But as the saying goes, looks can be deceiving. From Anthony's respected profession to their seemingly perfect life in Florida, everything appeared stable. But underneath this polished surface, a much darker reality was brewing. In 2019, the truth about Anthony Todt began to surface, and it wasn't pretty. Authorities discovered that he had been committing fraud, billing his patients for treatments they never received. The investigation also revealed that Anthony had been using this stolen money to maintain their luxurious lifestyle, paying for their beautiful home in Celebration and funding frequent trips to Disney World. But the financial troubles didn't stop there. Anthony had also taken out high-interest loans from New York City firms, trying to keep up with the family's expensive habits. When he failed to repay these loans, the firms took legal action against him, adding to his mounting stress. Despite initially denying any wrongdoing, Anthony eventually confessed to the fraud. He had been living a lie, and his once pristine reputation was now in shambles. It's believed that Megan and the children had no idea about the financial deception. They were not involved in Anthony's work, and he had kept them in the dark about the mounting debt. To the outside world, they appeared to be a happy, affluent family, but Anthony was crumbling under the weight of his secrets. By the time everything came to light, Anthony owed a staggering $200,000, and the pressure to keep up appearances was taking a toll on his mental health. Remarkably, despite these fraud charges, Anthony wasn't immediately arrested. He was allowed to return home to his family in Celebration. But things only got worse. The family was struggling to pay rent on their rental home, and soon an eviction notice appeared on their door. Anthony's mind began to go crazy under the pressure. The weight of his financial burdens, combined with the fear of his family discovering the truth, pushed him to the brink of desperation. So, in November 2019, Anthony came up with a plan to buy himself some time. He told Megan's family that they were going on a holiday and wouldn't be in touch for a while. At first, no one thought much of it. The Todts often traveled, and it wasn't unusual for them to be out of contact for a short period. But as the weeks passed, Megan's family began to worry. By mid-December, the silence became unbearable. Megan hadn't called or messaged anyone, not even on Christmas, a day she usually cherished with her loved ones. Even the neighbors started to notice that something was off. When they saw the eviction notice on the Totes' front door, one neighbor reached out to Megan. The response they received was brief and strange, not at all like the warm and friendly Megan they knew. This only deepened the suspicions. As concern grew, the Totes' extended family began to fear the worst. They contacted the authorities, urging them to perform a wellness check on the home and reserve place.
I'm wondering if somebody can do a wellness check on my brother and his family.
At one point, even the FBI got involved in the search for Anthony Tote. An FBI agent, who had been investigating his fraudulent activities in Connecticut, became increasingly worried and reached out to the Florida Sheriff's Office, urging them to locate the missing physical therapist. But despite multiple calls from the Tote family, the police didn't act immediately. It wasn't until January 13, 2020, when federal agents and deputies went to Anthony's home to execute an arrest warrant for his financial crimes, that they finally made contact with him. What they discovered that day was beyond anyone's worst fears. When the police rang the doorbell, Anthony Tote answered, but something was clearly wrong. He was shaking uncontrollably. When asked about his wife and children, he mumbled that the kids were at a friend's sleepover and that his wife Megan was asleep. His erratic behavior and strange responses made the officers suspicious, so they decided to enter the home. As soon as they stepped inside, they were hit with a strong, foul odor that hinted at something far more sinister than financial fraud. Their instincts led them upstairs to the master bedroom.
Any children here?
I can't remember if they went to the sleepover last night.
We asked him where Megan and the children were. He said Megan was upstairs sleeping, and he also called for her. We were getting no answer.
What's your wife's name?
Megan.
Megan?
Megan.
All right, come on down, bud.
We made our way upstairs to check on the children and check on Megan. The master bedroom door was open.
And a locked door.
Megan?
There, in the bedroom, were the decomposing bodies of Megan and the couple's 3 children, all wrapped in blankets. The chilling state of decay made it clear they hadn't just died recently, they had been dead for weeks. The horror didn't stop with just the family members. The police discovered that the family dog, Breezy, was also dead. And shockingly, except for little Zoe, every victim had multiple stab wounds. Forensic tests revealed that all the deceased had dangerously high levels of Benadryl in their systems. Empty bottles of the drug were scattered throughout the house, hinting at a calculated plan. Anthony Tote had been living amidst the bodies of his wife, children, and dog for weeks. So, what could have driven a person to commit such a horrific act? When questioned, Anthony claimed that Megan had been suffering from worsening health and had become obsessed with the idea of reincarnation.
Tell me what happened.
My wife is, I want to say, chronically ill. The liver issues and all that kind of stuff. And what was told to me is that when people die, they go to different aspects. And then sometimes never meet up in the light energy aspect.
According to him, Megan believed that an apocalypse was imminent and that their family would face unimaginable suffering if they survived. She allegedly convinced Anthony that the only way to escape this fate was to die together and be rewarded with a better afterlife.
Friday night, it was supposed to be a three-step plan. So we all stay together and go up. One person separated to the other.
Anthony said Megan had even explained this to the children, preparing them for the end. He described how they talked about death with their sons, making sure they understood what was about to happen.
You murdered your 3 children.
Mm-hmm. I know.
You take full responsibility for that?
I don't want to take full responsibility. Meg was involved, but I'll take full responsibility.
Well, Megan's dead. Where we're at right now is a very sad state. All 3 of your children are dead.
I know.
Your wife is dead.
I know.
You're alive.
Unfortunately.
In an even more disturbing twist, Anthony produced a suicide note, allegedly written by Megan. He claimed he had retyped it to honor his family's wishes. The letter spoke of their decision to die together as a way to avoid the torture of the world's end. It mentioned Megan's ongoing pain from liver issues and Lyme disease, and how the family was suffering daily. The note also touched on Anthony's dual life between Connecticut and Florida, which had reportedly caused unhappiness for Megan. It ended with a haunting promise that the family would be together forever, never to be separated again. The document outlined their rationale for this grim decision, including the emotional trauma of Megan's father's suicide and her 2 miscarriages, which, according to the note, had plunged them all into deep despair. In the middle of the disturbing note, the family expressed their constant fear of Anthony's father, Robert Tote, who had previously been convicted of attempting to murder Anthony's mother. The note revealed that the Tote took pride in their contributions to the world and the love they shared. They requested that their ashes, along with Breezy's, be scattered either in the ocean or at Harkness Memorial State Park, so they could be with Megan's father in eternal rest. The note concluded with a plea for peace and forgiveness, apologizing for the pain their actions would cause. It emphasized their wish to be together forever, free from suffering, and to watch over their loved ones. During his confession, Anthony told detectives that he and Megan had written the suicide note together. He claimed he only printed it out after the family's deaths. However, during his trial, his story shifted. He now said Megan had written the note alone and given it to him. He described a bizarre scene where he found the note in his urine-soaked pants after a hallucination and mistakenly drank what he thought was coffee, but was likely motor oil. He said he retyped the note to honor Megan's wishes about where to bury their ashes and to convey the family's unity. In court, Anthony continued to change his story. He claimed that Megan had written the note and left it behind, but he later denied any involvement in its creation. He also stated that his children had expressed a desire to die with him, which led them to follow through with their tragic plan. At this point, his story is nothing but outrageous. But if you think that's disturbing enough, wait till you hear his account of the murders. He confessed to smothering his 4-year-old daughter Zoe with a pillow, then stabbing and suffocating his 2 sons. He said Megan had stabbed herself and ingested large amounts of medicine but did not die. In her final moments, she allegedly begged Anthony to help her join their children, so he suffocated her with a pillow. After killing his family, Anthony stored their bodies in the bedroom. Despite having Benadryl in his system, he claimed he could not bring himself to stab himself and instead ventured out occasionally to buy alcohol and food. Truly disturbing. He eventually told detectives in detail how he killed his children and Breezy. For some, it might be hard to hear the details of what happened, but here's what he told the authorities. He said he held a pillow over his daughter Zoe's head for 10 to 15 minutes. When a detective asked how long she kicked and screamed, he replied, "Only a couple of minutes." So, for 10 to 15 minutes, your daughter was under the pillow, and she only kicked and screamed for a couple of minutes? In the interrogation, Tote explained that he and his wife believed that since they brought their children into the world, they should decide when they leave it. He claimed that he and Megan had discussed the plan to murder their children and die together before committing the horrific crime. He told the authorities that he stabbed and then smothered Alec as the boy fought back. Megan left midway through this murder, and Anthony continued, saying, "So I ended up putting a pillow over his head, and I put a pillow in the back of his head, so he wouldn't hit me with the back of his head. I reached around with my hand and held his nose and mouth, and he kept struggling until it stopped." When asked how long it took to kill Alec, his eldest son, Anthony said it went quickly. Megan was meditating as he killed Tyler downstairs, and Anthony claimed they loved their children and had salvation in mind as their reason for the murders. He also told detectives that between killing his family and when the bodies were found, he tried to kill himself using various methods like knives, zip ties around his neck, and Benadryl, but he backed out.
Didn't get there till Monday. What were you doing during this time frame? We're talking over 2 weeks.
Trying to kill myself. I tried the razor blade zip tie around the neck, was trying to figure out how to go through and fall in the knife in the right direction. In all honesty, I chickened out and cowered it out with a knife.
According to the reports presented by the medical examiner, The cause of death for all 4 victims was homicide by unspecified means, with Benadryl toxicity found in all their bodies. And according to the crime scene photos, hunting knives were used to stab the family members. The medical examiner couldn't determine whether the children were suffocated or strangled, but it was concluded that the stab wounds were likely inflicted after death. It was also revealed that only a small amount of Benadryl was used to drug the family, and one of Anthony's sons had tried to fight back during the attack, evident from a visible scratch on Anthony's neck at the time of his arrest, along with blisters and cuts on his hands. Investigators found that his older son was clutching rosary beads when he died. Despite all this evidence, Anthony suddenly changed his story. He abandoned his initial claim of a suicide pact and an impending apocalypse, instead alleging in a handwritten letter to his father, Robert Tote, that Megan was behind the murders. According to this new version, Megan had poisoned the children by spiking their pudding with Benadryl before stabbing them. When Anthony confronted her, she allegedly stabbed herself and died right in front of him. This new tale is just as bizarre, if not more so, than the original story of a suicide pact. Regardless of which version is true, the undeniable fact remains: Anthony Tote murdered his family. And sadly, the true reasons behind this horrific act may never be fully understood, but there's speculation about possible trauma or a troubled past that could have driven him to such violence. One of the most notable traumas from his early childhood occurred in March 1980, when Anthony was just 4 years old. At that time, someone broke into the Tote family home in Pennsylvania and shot his mother. According to a 1981 Philadelphia Inquirer article, Anthony heard his mother screaming before the fatal shot was fired. Anthony's father, Robert Tote, a former special education teacher and wrestling coach, was later charged with attempted murder. He was accused of hiring an ex-student with learning disabilities to shoot his wife so that he can be with his mistress. Loretta Tote, Anthony's mother, survived the attack but lost her left eye. However, Robert Tote denies any involvement in the attempt on his wife's life. His stance has remained unchanged since his arrest. During his trial, he testified in his own defense. In December 1980, he was convicted and initially sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. According to the article, Robert later had his sentence reduced to 5 to 10 years. Despite his claim of innocence, Robert does acknowledge his extramarital affair, which led to his absence the night of the shooting, leaving his family vulnerable and exposing his son to trauma that could have influenced his later actions. Anthony's sister, Chrissy Caplet, also shared her thoughts. She mentioned a federal investigation into Anthony for alleged Medicaid fraud, which could have landed him in prison for 1 or 2 years. She speculated that Anthony, witnessing his father's arrest at a young age, might have been motivated to avoid a similar fate for his own children. However, she insisted that this did not excuse his actions. "I never thought my brother could do this, not in a million years," Caplet said. Robert Tote, in an interview, pondered the impact of the violence surrounding young Anthony. Even though he maintains his innocence regarding the 1980 attempted murder and had minimal involvement in his children's upbringing, he acknowledges that Anthony witnessed a violent attack and believes it must have deeply affected him. "There's only so much trauma a young kid can take," he said. Regarding Anthony's trial, he was eventually known as the Killer Disney Dad and faced trial in April 2022. The prosecution presented substantial evidence, including Anthony's confessions, alleged suicide notes, and forensic reports during the 6-day trial. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Anthony's lawyers struggled to present a strong defense. Anthony frequently changed his story during the trial, initially claiming a suicide pact and apocalypse scenario, only to later blame his wife, Megan, for the murders. Anthony's defense tried to suppress his earlier confessions and claims of medical insurance fraud, but the confessions were admitted as evidence. Despite his previous confessions and the compelling evidence against him, Anthony pleaded not guilty. He maintained that his second story, blaming Megan for the murders, was true, and that his initial confession was a lie to protect her. He spoke about Megan's struggles with Lyme disease and depression after a miscarriage. claiming that this led to several suicide attempts on his part. The defense argued that the bodies were too decomposed to determine the exact cause of death, and that there was insufficient proof to conclusively link Anthony to the murders. They also pointed out the lack of witnesses. However, the prosecution argued that Anthony's initial confession was consistent with the crime scene evidence and questioned why he hadn't called the police or intervened if Megan was truly responsible. In April 2022, after 6 hours of deliberation, Anthony Todt was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty for killing the family dog, Breezy. Despite his disbelief and claims of innocence, the jury convicted him. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole and an additional year for animal cruelty. Anthony's father criticized the verdict and the handling of the case, arguing that Anthony's confession, made while he was emotionally distressed, should not have been taken as truth. Despite these claims, the reality remains that Anthony Todt was responsible for the deaths of his family members. And trauma can never excuse the horrific act of murder, and it will never be justified. They say that blood is thicker than water, but when it comes to murder, family ties can easily become as twisted as the crime itself. On August 7th, 39 years ago, an entire family was found brutally murdered in their farmhouse. Each member had been shot multiple times, leaving no one behind, except one. Jeremy Bamber, the only survivor, claimed that his mentally ill sister had gone berserk, killing everyone, including her own children, before turning the gun on herself. His sister did struggle with schizophrenia. She had been hospitalized before and once claimed her children were the devil's offspring. She even had suicidal thoughts. But then at the funeral, Jeremy was spotted cracking jokes, grinning to himself and making comments about finally being in charge. Was this just his way of coping, or was there something darker hiding behind that smile? And was his sister really the killer, or was she just an easy scapegoat? Let's get to the bottom of this and uncover the truth behind the White House farm murders. The Bamber family was once considered the most picture-perfect family. June and Neville Bamber, the parents, got married in 1949 in a Christian church. Both were deeply religious, with June being especially devout. On the other hand, Neville was known as a strong, manly man, easygoing, down-to-earth, and well-liked in their community. He was highly respected, often seen as the backbone of the village. Additionally, Neville loved a good party, while June was quieter and more reserved, making them the perfect pair. But June's devotion to her faith was intense. She practically lived and breathed religion. After they married, June and Neville longed to have children, but soon discovered they couldn't conceive. So they decided to adopt and welcome 2 young children, a boy and a girl, into their home. Though not biologically related, these children quickly became part of their loving family. They named their children Sheila and Jeremy. At first, the family lived in a small house, but as the kids grew, they decided they needed more space, so they moved into a larger home that had once belonged to June's father. This new place was quite impressive. Over 300 acres of land and a classic red brick farmhouse with white trim. It was the kind of house that looked straight out of a picture book, and it was known in the area as White House Farm. The Bamber family also owned a business called O.C. Road Campsites. In short, the Bambers were financially well off. They had their farmhouse, a flat in London, and a caravan site. So June and Neville wanted nothing but the best for Sheila and Jeremy as they grew up. They sent Sheila to several private schools to ensure she got the best education possible. After high school, Sheila went on to secretarial school to become a secretary, following the path her parents believed would secure her future. Jeremy also went to private school, but he had a lot of behavioral issues. He had a knack for causing trouble and wasn't exactly the most popular kid. In fact, his family struggled with his wild antics, including some pretty extreme pranks. One of his favorites was to scare his mother, who had a deep fear of rats. Jeremy would hide baby rats in his pocket and force her to reach in, making her touch them. He'd also zoom around her on his bike, circling so fast it made her dizzy. Because of this, his parents hoped that boarding school might straighten him out. But instead, Jeremy faced more challenges. He basically felt isolated, bullied by both students and teachers, and was mocked for being adopted. The bullying was so intense that rumors of possible abuse at the school surfaced. But after enduring these tough times, Jeremy finally graduated and headed to college. And after graduating in 1982, he returned home, where his parents made sure he was well taken care of. They set him up with a charming cottage just down the road from White House Farm, a new car, and a slice of their business. They even gave him an 8% share in the campsite business, with the expectation that he would work either at the farm or for the company. To the outside world, the Bamber family seemed like the epitome of perfection. Bright kids, a beautiful home, devoted Christian values, and a thriving business. They appeared to have it all together. But in reality, June had a tough time with depression. In 1955 and again in 1958, she ended up in a psychiatric hospital. Back then, people didn't understand mental health issues very well. June was treated with electroshock therapy, where tiny electric currents are sent through the brain to cause a brief seizure. This was supposed to help reset the brain, but today it's used only in extreme cases and is still a bit controversial. Interestingly, June's depression was partly because of her strained relationship with her kids. Now, remember, she was very religious, seeing everything as a battle between good and evil. If someone didn't share her beliefs, she would instantly think they were bad. And June was upset with Sheila, who had been trying to make it as a model, and Jeremy, who was secretly growing cannabis on the farm. Her strict religious values seemed to push her kids further away. The tension between June and Sheila was especially intense. June even called Sheila the devil's child, after Sheila got pregnant at 17. Despite being normally against abortion, June pushed for it to protect their family's reputation. This decision drove a huge wedge between them, leaving Sheila feeling deeply betrayed and never able to trust her mother again. In a twist of fate, Sheila actually married the man she'd originally gotten pregnant by, Colin, in May 1977. They wanted to start a family right away, and after a few attempts, they had twin boys, Daniel and Nicholas. But just 5 months after the babies were born, Sheila discovered that Colin had been cheating on her throughout their marriage. Their relationship fell apart, and Sheila was left heartbroken and deeply depressed. By 1983, Sheila's mental health had deteriorated so much that she went to see Dr. Hugh Ferguson, the same doctor who had treated her mother. Dr. Ferguson admitted her to a psychiatric hospital where Sheila was initially diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. However, after further evaluation, Dr. Ferguson changed the diagnosis to paranoid schizophrenia, and Sheila's struggles mirrored her mother's. She began calling her children the devil's children, and even expressed terrifying thoughts of harming them because she believed they were possessed. She also claimed she could make her kids harm others. Despite these alarming signs, Sheila was eventually released from the hospital in September 1983 and was put on antipsychotic medication. She continued to see Dr. Ferguson regularly. Unfortunately, she had another psychotic episode and ended up back in the hospital for about a month. During this stay, it was decided that her children should be removed from her care due to her ongoing mental health issues.
When I first saw Sheila Caffel, I diagnosed that she was in a state of acute psychosis and had been so for about 2 weeks. It was evident that she had been depressed and unconfident for the previous 18 months and had an increasing sensitivity about other people. The history of her case was of a slow onset, leading to an acute breakdown, inferring a poor outlook. I arranged for Sheila to be admitted to St Andrew's Hospital, Northampton, on the 4th of August 1983. During her treatment, I found that Sheila had bizarre delusions about possession by the devil and complex ideas about having sex with her twin sons. She thought her sons would seduce her and saw evil in both of them. In particular, she thought her son Nicholas was becoming a woman-hater and was a potential murderer. She said she felt as if she was caught up in a coven of evil. These feelings appeared to be involved with her relationship with her adoptive mother and her standards of good and evil. These feelings, she expressed, were clear symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia. Sheila did not give any impression that she was violent or potentially violent. She was bewildered.
They were sent to live with their father. But on August 4th, 1985, Sheila took her sons to visit her parents and Jeremy at the farm. The kids were thrilled to see their grandparents, and Sheila was eager to reconnect with her family, even though there was still some tension with her mother. The family was happy and excited to see each other. On August 6th, 2 days later, they all gathered for a family dinner. Jeremy, Sheila, the twins, and their parents, Neville and June. During the dinner, Neville and June suggested that Sheila consider putting the boys into daytime foster care. It's unclear whether they meant actual foster care or just daycare, but Sheila was upset by the suggestion. Jeremy noted that Sheila seemed offended and uncomfortable, possibly feeling like they doubted her ability to care for the children during the day. After dinner, around 9:30 p.m., Jeremy headed back to his cottage down the road. Around the same time, the farm secretary, Barbara, called Neville. She noticed that Neville seemed preoccupied and agitated, and it sounded like there might have been an argument happening in the house. Neville even abruptly hung up on Barbara, which was very unusual for him, as he was normally very polite. About 30 minutes later, June's sister Pamela called. During their conversation, Sheila also spoke with Pamela, but Pamela noticed that Sheila seemed a bit off. Fast forward to the early hours of August 7th, around 3:30 a.m., Jeremy allegedly received a call from his father, Neville, saying that Sheila had gone wild with a gun. The call suddenly cut off, prompting Jeremy to call the police. However, instead of dialing emergency dispatch, he called the non-emergency number.
My father's phoned from White House Farm and he sounded really frightened. He says, my sister's gone crazy and she's got a gun.
When Jeremy finally reached the police, they told him to head to the farm and that they would meet him there. However, as they drove, the officers noticed that Jeremy was driving unusually slowly. Given the urgency of the situation, his father had reported that Sheila had gone wild with a gun. This slow pace was strange. By around 5 a.m., everyone arrived at the house. Instead of going inside immediately, the police chose to wait outside for 2 hours. They even used a megaphone to shout into the house, asking if anyone was there, but received no response. The only sound was a dog barking. The reason for this delay was unusual and unexplained. On the other hand, Jeremy spoke with the police outside, updating them on the family dinner, the phone call from his dad, and the upset Sheila had shown about the suggestion of foster care. He also mentioned Sheila's mental illness. At the last minute, Jeremy told the police he had left his gun at his parents' house, loaded and sitting on the counter. Given the potential family conflict, the loaded gun, and Sheila's mental state, the police began to piece together a troubling picture. It wasn't until 7:54 a.m. that they finally entered the house, where they discovered the bodies of Sheila, her 2 boys, and her parents, Neville and June. June, Sheila, and the twins were upstairs, while Neville was downstairs in the kitchen. Neville, found slumped over in his pajamas, had been shot 8 times, 6 of those in the face. It was clear he had fought back, as there were numerous defense wounds on his body. Sheila was found in the master bedroom, and the boys, Daniel and Nicholas, were in their beds. June had been shot 7 times, Sheila 3 times, Daniel 5 times, and Nicholas 3 times. The scene was a bloody mess, and the phone was found off the hook. When Jeremy was informed, he had a severe reaction. He was reportedly hysterical, screaming, crying, and even throwing up. The police quickly concluded that Sheila, with her mental illness, had killed her family before turning the gun on herself. This theory was soon spread by the media, painting Sheila as the culprit due to her unstable mental state. However, some aspects of the case were puzzling. Sheila had been shot 3 times, which was unusual. The gun was found on her, pointing in the direction of her face. The medical examiner noted that it's possible to shoot yourself multiple times while still being conscious enough to pull the trigger again. But then again, the handling of the crime scene was notably poor. The police burned the bedding and carpet to remove the blood, an action that destroyed potential evidence. They also mishandled the gun, with a detective picking it up barehanded, ignoring the importance of preserving DNA and other fingerprints. Additionally, a carving in Sheila's room that read, "I hate it here," was found, but it was never determined when it was made, whether that day or much earlier. So it was quickly determined that Sheila was the problem and the culprit. 3 days after the murders, Jeremy inherited White House Farm, along with the family businesses. With his parents gone, he was free from their strict religious rules and could do as he pleased, including continuing his cannabis farming. A few days after the murders, the family held a funeral. Jeremy's behavior at the event drew some raised eyebrows. Instead of a quiet mourning, he was overly dramatic, loud sobs, screaming, and generally making a scene. Friends and family started to notice something strange. After the service, when everyone was leaving, some relatives caught Jeremy with a wide grin on his face as he wiped away his tears. It seemed like he had switched from sobbing to smiling as soon as he thought no one was watching. The media coverage only added to the oddness. Jeremy made a big show of collapsing to the ground and needed help from his girlfriend to get up. But as soon as the cameras were off, he snapped out of his dramatic act. People noticed he was switching between being overly emotional and then acting completely normal. During the wake, he made bizarre comments, like how he was now the boss, and talked about his plans with his girlfriend in a disturbingly casual way, which was unsettling given the circumstances. Meanwhile, the police tested the gun found at the scene for fingerprints. They discovered both Sheila's and Jeremy's prints on it. Jeremy explained this by saying the gun was his and that he had been handling it earlier that day for a planned rabbit hunt, though he never got around to going out. Soon after, while Jeremy was settling into the house, one of his cousins found a gun silencer hidden in a cupboard in the family office. This was a significant discovery because, if Sheila had used the silencer, it would have been impossible for her to shoot herself in the way described. The silencer was missing from the rifle when it was found, raising further suspicions about Jeremy's involvement. With the silencer attached, the long gun became too unwieldy and lengthy for Sheila to physically maneuver into a position under her chin to shoot herself, making it nearly impossible for her to have committed the act on her own. When the silencer was examined, investigators found a small spot of blood on it. It was sticky and strange, so they sent it to forensics. While they couldn't determine whose blood it was, they confirmed it wasn't Jeremy's and it could belong to any of the victims. This meant the silencer was likely used during the murders, making it impossible for Sheila to have committed the act herself. The fact that the silencer was later found in the gun cupboard was crucial for the prosecution, as Sheila would have had no reason to return it to the cupboard before taking her own life. Jeremy's girlfriend, Julie, who he had been with since 1983, received a call from him on the day of the murders. He mentioned something was wrong but didn't give details and abruptly hung up. A few hours later, Julie found out about the murders. Jeremy's call and sudden disconnection raised more suspicion about his involvement. About a month after the murders, Jeremy and Julie's relationship started to crumble. Julie grew increasingly suspicious of Jeremy, constantly questioning his statements about his family's deaths and poking holes in his stories. Their arguments escalated, with Julie even attempting to smother him with a pillow during one heated fight. Things began to go completely sour when Julie discovered Jeremy's infidelity, pushing her to the breaking point. Furious, she physically attacked him and then went to the police, expressing her concerns that Jeremy might be responsible for the Bamber family murders. She revealed Jeremy's shady past, including a previous scheme where he staged a break-in at his family's business to steal money, which he claimed was meant to highlight their need for better security. Julie also shared that Jeremy often voiced frustration with his family, feeling they were overly controlling and critical of his choices. He reportedly believed Sheila was a bad mother and that the children would turn out disturbed. Julie suspected Jeremy's motive was greed, thinking he wanted more money despite the significant amount his family had already provided. According to Julie, Jeremy's parents had recently made a will, dividing their estate equally between him and his sister Sheila. However, Jeremy was dissatisfied with this arrangement and wanted the entire inheritance for himself. Julie claimed that Jeremy intended to eliminate his whole family in one go, ensuring no one was left to share the inheritance. He allegedly discussed various methods, including burning down their house, drugging them with sleeping pills, or shooting them to death. Jeremy reportedly believed it would be easy to blame Sheila due to her schizophrenia, positioning himself as the grieving victim. Julie also recounted a chilling conversation where Jeremy called her after a family dinner, expressing his frustration and stating, "It's tonight or never." Later, at 3 a.m., he allegedly called her again, saying, "Everything's going well. Something's gone wrong at the farm. Love ya. Talk to you later." The night of the murders, when they were outside the house, Jeremy reportedly whispered to Julie, "I should have been an actor," after she questioned his involvement. Julie's account further escalated when she claimed Jeremy confessed that the family plumber had been hired to carry out the murders, although this was quickly disproven as the plumber had a solid alibi. The police, however, wasted no time in arresting Jeremy, whose alibi didn't hold up. After landing in jail, he bailed himself out and hightailed it to Amsterdam, where he wasted no time selling off his family's belongings, even going so far as to try to sell nude photos of his own sister to a tabloid. But his luck ran out when he returned to town on September 29th and was immediately arrested. When the trial kicked off on October 3, 1986, the prosecution painted a damning picture of Jeremy, arguing that he orchestrated the murders and used Sheila as his scapegoat. They highlighted the defensive wounds on his father, Neville, suggesting he had fought someone stronger than Sheila, likely Jeremy. The defense, on the other hand, tried to shift the blame back to Sheila, citing her mental health struggles, but the evidence against Jeremy was too compelling. After just 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jeremy guilty, sentencing him to 5 life terms with no chance of parole. Yet this case still stirs debate today. Some people believe Sheila was the real perpetrator, while others think Jeremy's ex-girlfriend, Julie, fabricated her story to get back at him. And through it all, Jeremy continues to proclaim his innocence. Due to Jeremy's conviction, the estate was passed to his cousins instead. One cousin moved into White House Farm, and together with others, they acquired full ownership of the caravan site and other properties. Jeremy claimed that his family had framed him, a claim one of the cousins dismissed in 2010 as an absolute load of piffle. What's your take on this? Do you believe Sheila's mental illness drove her to commit these horrific acts, or do you think Jeremy, driven by greed and a desire to escape his controlling family, was the true culprit? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.
Yes, I was wondering if I could have a police officer come to an office building. We have somebody in our building that will not leave, and he's not an employee. And apparently he
Have you asked him to leave yet?
Yeah, we have.
I will not stop until I find my family or until it's my last day in this earth.
How could a man slay not just his wife, but his 2 young stepchildren as well? That's the question we must ask when looking at the case of Luis Toledo, a man whose jealousy and violent impulses led to the brutal slaughter and mysterious disappearance of his entire family. 10 years after the incident occurred, it seems like there are more questions than answers. Did Luis Toledo, a former gang member, really take all those lives that day? How did his obsession with his 21-year-old neighbor, Tyshawn Jackson, factor into everything? Today, we'll be exploring the mysteries behind this case and attempting to explain the bizarre, tragic events that unfolded. 28-year-old Yesenia Suarez was a normal woman by all accounts. She had 2 children, 9-year-old Thalia and 8-year-old Michael, who she'd been raising alone in Deltona, Florida ever since their father left the picture. The circumstances behind the father's exit from their lives are unclear, but the void he left behind was difficult to fill. Even so, Yesenia's mother, Felicita Neves, says that she was very happy with her life. She loved being a mom, her children were lively and joyful, and everything basically seemed perfect for a time. But a few years before her demise, Yesenia met a man named Luis Toledo and felt an instant attraction. Their chance encounter happened at a festival where Yesenia was attacked by a man. Toledo immediately jumped to her rescue, picking her up and taking her to the hospital to make sure she was okay. What Yesenia wanted more than anything else was a protector, and it seemed like she'd found exactly that in Toledo. Toledo was the dictionary definition of a protective, masculine lover. He was strong and never shied away from a fight, so much so that he earned the nickname Semi, owing to his fists striking people with the force of a semi-truck. Yesenia was smitten, but she had no idea about the dark past he was hiding. Later reports revealed that Toledo had been the third highest-ranking member of the Latin Kings, a street gang that was involved in all sorts of crimes, including narcotics trafficking and homicide. However, by the time he met Yesenia, Toledo seemed to have left all of that behind him, even testifying against his former gang in court. Because of this, Yesenia began to trust him enough to allow him to move in. Toledo became a stepfather to her children, and for a time, Yesenia felt that things were going to get better. The couple got married, Luis started going to barber college to start a career for himself, and Yesenia claimed he was the best thing to ever happen to her. It didn't take long for the image of domestic bliss to shatter. Though he seemed more than happy to fill the role of protector, Toledo was less willing to take on the responsibilities of a provider. While Yesenia went to work at her full-time job at American Canine Solutions, Toledo would spend the day playing video games, going to the gym, and basically doing whatever he pleased. His favorite activity seemed to involve visiting his neighbor and fellow barber college student, 21-year-old Tyshawn Jackson. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that Tyshawn had been involved in criminal activities in the past, although the exact nature of these activities haven't been revealed. The connection between him and Toledo is similarly unclear. Were they really just friends? Or was something deeper and more sinister lurking under the surface? We may never know, but this relationship would become central to the violent events that followed. Regardless, Yesenia quickly grew tired of her husband's lack of discipline. They frequently got into fights over how often he played video games, and his relationship with Tyshawn was another source of friction. There was also another secret that would escalate matters down the line. In mid-2013, Toledo started to suspect his wife was having an affair with her married co-worker, Kevin Dredden. Toledo had always been the jealous type, and his suspicions seemed to send him over the edge. On October 13, 2013, Yesenia went on a business trip with Kevin, prompting Toledo to start calling her non-stop. He'd already accused her of sleeping with Kevin in the past, an accusation that Yesenia had always denied. While on the business trip, she texted her husband, telling him that he's not thinking clearly. She explained that absolutely nothing was going on between her and Dredden, but Toledo wasn't convinced. He responded to the text by asking her who has her attention if not Kevin, implying that she'd been neglecting her own husband and that someone must be taking up most of her time. The fact that he himself spent the majority of the day with Tyshawn instead of taking care of his stepchildren likely didn't occur to Toledo at the time. The fight continued over the next 3 days, so by the time Yesenia returned from the business trip, she was done with the relationship. Toledo's controlling, possessive behavior had pushed her past the point of no return, and she told him she wanted a divorce on October 16th. Toledo seemed to take the news surprisingly well, asking Yesenia to let him stay with her for 3 months so he could save up some money before moving out. Yesenia agreed, but she didn't know that she'd effectively given herself a death sentence. According to police reports, Toledo had bugged Yesenia's phone not long after she returned from the business trip. As a result, he was able to see every single message on her phone. One of these messages turned out to be an inappropriately intimate exchange between her and Kevin, where they were planning to hook up at a later date. This absolutely infuriated Toledo, who entered his car and began speeding to Yesenia's office. During this time, Yesenia desperately texted Toledo, pleading with him not to do anything rash. She claimed that the encounter between her and Dredd had been a mistake. Despite that, Toledo arrived at her office, ready to tear the whole place down. At approximately 1 p.m., a 911 call was made from Yesenia's office, with the caller stating that there was a man in the building who refused to leave.
Yes, I was wondering if I could have a police officer come to an office building. We have somebody in our building that will not leave, and he's not an employee. And apparently he
Have you asked him to leave yet?
Yeah, we have.
As police departed for the scene, Toledo stomped into the main office floor and started screaming at Yesenia and Kevin. The 911 call also happened to record Toledo's statements, with the enraged man saying that he had some incriminating messages to show his wife and her lover.
I got some messages to show you, Bobby. I got some messages to show you.
I'm sorry.
Yesenia can be heard apologizing and sobbing as her husband makes a scene. Witnesses claim that he then slapped her on the face with all his might, sending her crashing to the floor. Following this, Toledo exited the building, fleeing the sound of police sirens. He and Yesenia later met at Felicita's place to hash things out and come to terms. Did they want to continue in their relationship, or was it time to call it quits? Apparently, they mutually decided to give their relationship another shot and went home at around 7:45 p.m. This would be the last time that anyone saw Yesenia Suarez alive. No one knows exactly what happened over the next 12 hours. All we have to go on is testimony from Toledo and reports from the police investigation. Even so, we can stitch together the approximate sequence of events that led to the demise of Yesenia and her children. At around 3 in the morning, Toledo claims that he ran into Tyshawn outside. He complained about how his wife never let him play video games at home, but then decided to just go for it anyway since it was his home too. The pair started gaming, and when Yesenia heard them, she apparently came outside and started screaming at Toledo. However, the ensuing investigation revealed this version of events to be completely false. This means that Toledo and Yesenia were alone at home, and any altercation they got into had nothing to do with the culprit and Tyshawn playing video games. One thing we do know for sure is that Toledo slammed his hand into Yesenia's throat in the early hours of October 23rd. The force of the blow was so severe that it shattered her windpipe, with Toledo watching as she died in front of his eyes. Toledo claims that Yesenia attacked him first, even trying to show scratch marks on his back to prove it.
Going off on me, whatever, da-da-da, and she told that she wanted everybody to leave. She wanted me to get out the house. I told her I didn't have to go. She came at me, grabbed me on the back. Yeah. She grabbed me from the back. I just got upset. I got so tired of her grabbing on me. I couldn't get her up. She fell down on the floor, holding her neck, looking at me. He couldn't breathe.
However, the fact that these marks weren't presented as evidence by his defense suggests that he completely made up this detail. Either way, the argument that preceded Toledo's vicious attack was so loud that it woke up the kids. Thalia and Michael rushed out of their bedroom to find their mom dead on the floor, and their stepdad looming over her. Once again, there are two versions of the events that followed. According to Toledo, who maintained that Tyshawn was there the entire time, he told his neighbor to take the children to the bathroom so that they wouldn't be traumatized by their mother's corpse. Toledo claims that he then heard the children screaming, and when he opened the bathroom door, he found Tyshawn standing over their dead bodies with a bloody axe in his hands. However, evidence found at the crime scene basically confirms this story to be false. Forensic analysts noted that there was hardly any blood spatter on the walls. Instead, there were just a few drops here and there. If the perpetrator had used an axe as the homicide weapon, it would have left considerable spatter in every corner. The type of spatter they found suggests that a blunt object was used, and the actual object hints at the sheer brutality of the attack Toledo committed. What could this object have been? Before we get into that, we must first discuss the discovery of the crime and the investigation that followed. On the morning of October 23rd, Yesenia's mother became suspicious when she didn't receive her regular morning call from her daughter. This prompted her to call her daughter several times, only for her calls to go unanswered. By this point, Felicita was all but certain that something bad had happened. She had a sinking feeling in her stomach, a sense of impending doom, and she just had to drive over there to find out what happened. She called the police before heading out, arriving at the same time as the deputies.
I haven't heard from my daughter since last night. I know she was having some issues with her husband.
And you think maybe she's endangered by her husband?
Yes, ma'am.
Moments later, Toledo pulls up in his car looking perfectly calm and collected. When Felicita asks him where her daughter is, Toledo says that she left with the kids at some point last night. His ruse wasn't going to last, though. Police soon ask him to let them inside, and when they enter, they're overwhelmed by the smell of Lysol. This might not have been enough to arrest him on its own, but Toledo was already wanted for the assault at the office the previous day. The police were able to bring him in, and Felicita was left to wonder what became of her grandchildren. Surely Yesenia wouldn't have just run off with them, she thought. She decided to call the school to see if they were there, and felt like her heart had fallen out of her chest when school officials said they hadn't shown up that morning. Felicita was now certain that Toledo had done something terrible to her daughter and grandchildren, and police got to work trying to put the pieces together. The scene of the apparent crime was cordoned off, and police started scouring the family home for clues. An investigator found spots of blood in the bathroom, where they'd later realized the children were slain. The police were still treating this as a missing persons case due to the lack of bodies, but this was soon about to change. For now, Toledo maintained that his wife wasn't missing, and that she could very well be with her lover, Kevin. However, Kevin's wife confirmed that he'd been with her all night. The case took a shocking turn when none other than Tyshawn Jackson approached police to tell them something critical. Shortly after 6 in the morning, he'd received a call from Toledo claiming that his wife was missing and he needed his help in moving her car. He never explained why he needed to move her car, and Tyshawn didn't question his friend's motivations. Toledo drove his wife's car while Tyshawn followed in Toledo's vehicle, and once they arrived, the neighbor witnessed the culprit wiping Yesenia's car down. They then drove to a nearby dumpster, where Toledo disposed of empty bottles of cleaning chemicals and the mat from the trunk of his car. Toledo returned to the car and told Tyshawn that he had just snapped. Shaken by this strange behavior, Tyshawn told Toledo to drop him off at a convenience store, where he was captured on surveillance footage waiting in line. When police located the dumpster, they found a pair of boots wrapped up in the trunk mat with blood on them. This indicates that Toledo had either stomped or kicked at least one or two of the victims to death, and possibly all of them. With the new evidence and Tyshawn's testimony, police were able to go back to Toledo with a new approach. They showed him pictures of his family, which sparked an intensely emotional reaction from the perpetrator. Between sobs, he confessed to shattering his wife's windpipe, but claimed that Tyshawn was the one that took the children's lives with an axe.
Okay, because that's where you're having that issue. Yeah, we can move on. We can move on.
I don't know how bad I want to kill him. I really wanted to kill him, but anybody needs to die, it was him.
You want to talk about him? Now, you went over, he had the left hand, something in his left hand, or right hand?
It was in his right hand.
His right hand. And it was can you describe it, exactly how it looked?
Brown wooden handle, black tape on it, and it was arrested.
As we've said previously, investigators concluded that Tyshawn wasn't involved with the actual crime. There's a chance that Toledo knew he was out of options. During the interrogation, he kept asking to go to the bathroom, claiming that he was experiencing stomach problems. During one of these visits, he shattered the bathroom mirror, picked up one of the shards, and began slashing at his arms. His attempt to take his own life failed, with police breaking down the door, dragging him out, and sending him to get medical attention.
You got his bathroom again? Okay. Let's make sure it's clear.
He's able to barricade himself in the bathroom. He breaks a mirror, takes the glass from the mirror, and begins to start cutting himself.
Despite the failure of the attempt, it's a strong sign that Toledo had a guilty conscience. His attempt to explain his wife's disappearance had failed, as did his claims that Tyshawn was the one behind the children losing their lives. Right before this incident, Toledo basically admitted that he knew where the bodies were and that he'd never confessed their location. Regardless, the police had enough evidence to charge Toledo with 2 counts of homicide in the 2nd degree, 1 count of homicide in the 3rd degree, and an additional count of tampering with physical evidence. Due to Toledo's background as an enforcer for the Latin Kings, authorities were sure that he had the knowledge required to dispose of the bodies.
Knowledge of how to clean a crime scene, how to dispose of evidence, how to dispose of bodies. He was
the expert at that.
He was.
What's more, he appeared to flash gang signs at one point during his trial. This seems to suggest that he was threatening the prosecution, but his signaling was noticed by the judge and led to a stern reprimand. Even though he was out of options, Toledo didn't seem willing to give up his violent ways. During the trial, several witnesses came forward to testify against him, including Kevin Dredden and Tyshawn Jackson. Kevin spoke about the assault at the office, telling the court that Toledo had immediately become violent with his wife. As for Tyshawn, he denied any involvement in the actual crime, and the evidence seemed to support this. On top of that, the young man broke down into sobs at the implication that he could have slain the children, saying that he liked them and that they were good kids.
You like the kids?
They're nice kids.
Do you feel close to them?
Yes.
Do you have anything to do with their death?
No.
The most damning evidence of all was Toledo's own confession, which the defense desperately wanted to suppress. Their efforts went in vain, with the judge allowing all of Toledo's statements to become part of the record. Between his confession and Tyshawn's heartfelt testimony, the jury were convinced.
The verdict appears to be in proper order. Will the defendant please rise, face the jury, and hearken to the verdict? Madam Clerk, publish the verdict.
In the Circuit Court of the 7th Judicial Circuit in and for St. Johns County, Florida, State of Florida versus North Toledo, case number 2013-102-888, CFDF. Verdict. Count 1. Murder of Michael Elijah Otto. We, the jury, found the defendant Louis Toledo as to count 1 of the indictment as follows. Guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment. Count 2, first-degree murder of Thalia Otto. We, the jury, found the defendant Louis Toledo as to count 2 of the indictment as follows. Guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment. Count 3, second-degree murder of Justine Suarez. We, the jury, found the defendant Louis Toledo as to count 3 of the indictment as follows. Guilty of the charge of second-degree murder as charged in the indictment. Count 4, tampering with physical evidence. We, the jury, found the defendant Louis Toledo as to count 4 of the indictment, guilty of the charge of tampering with physical evidence. So say we all, dated in St. Augustine, St. Johns County, Florida, this 27th day of October 2017, Miller, Fort Worth.
Toledo was the man behind this twisted incident, and he deserved to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. 10 of the 12 jury members wanted Toledo to get the death penalty, but since the law requires a unanimous verdict, the perpetrator was able to escape with his life. Even so, the judge noted that he showed zero remorse during the trial and sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences behind bars. More than a decade later, Felicita Neves continues to hold memorials for her daughter and grandchildren. She's become a vocal activist, raising awareness about domestic violence and the loss it can cause. Her family is gone forever, but police and prosecutors managed to ensure that he'll never hurt anyone again.
The jurors were asked that if you were remorseful about the killings. By a vote of 12-0, they said no. Not even the 2 people who voted to spare your life found any remorse in your actions or your statements. I totally concur with their findings. I don't believe you're remorseful. And as such, you will receive no mercy from the court.
However, the bodies of Yesenia Suarez and her children, Thalia and Otto, haven't been found to this very day. What do you think of this case? Did Luis Toledo get the sentence he deserved, or should prosecutors have pushed for the death penalty?
Yeah, well, I've murdered 4 people.
What happens when the systems you trust let a violent criminal roam freely? And what happens when you invite this criminal into your home, near your children? In today's case, we'll look at how the monster known as Damien Bendall was created, emboldened, and let loose due to the incompetence of the authorities we trust to keep us safe. This is a story of a ticking time bomb who ultimately took the lives of 4 innocent souls in the most inhumane way possible. As we uncover the details of this case, you will be shocked to see just how preventable it all could have been. Let's get started. Damien Bendall was born on the 6th of January 1990 in Swindon, a town in Wiltshire, England. Right from the get-go, Bendall's family life was chaotic. He grew up regularly witnessing fighting, drug use, and people breaking the law. Instead of being ashamed of this, Bendall actually felt proud. He would brag to his peers about how many times his family members had been in jail. According to his own account, he started selling drugs at the age of 9. A source from his hometown said Bendall's criminal acts were all part of a stated intention to emulate a bad boy relative he looked up to. The source claimed he always wanted to be like his relative, but always fell short because the relative was far worse. He was open about it and would say he wanted to be a bad boy. A neighbor who also knew him growing up described Bendall as a fantasist who boasted of hanging around with gangsters in South London. As Bendall got older, he started causing trouble in his neighborhood. In 2004, at age 13, he was reprimanded for criminal damage after throwing an egg at a woman's house. From there, he would try to escalate his violence to a sickening level. Bendall was known for hurting animals. Locals said he especially took pleasure in torturing kittens. Research has consistently reported childhood cruelty to animals as the first warning sign of later delinquency, violence, and criminal behavior. In fact, nearly all violent crime perpetrators have a history of animal cruelty in their profiles. It's definitely a red flag to look out for. Not only that, but Bendall would viciously attack the racial minorities in his community. He claimed he was a high-ranking member of a white supremacist group called the Aryan Brotherhood. According to him, he had carried out several hate crimes for which he was never convicted. He reported having 2 Nazi-inspired tattoos as well. But the issue here is that there is no evidence he has ever been a part of this group. His probation officers would even go on to mention that he had a habit of telling people grandiose stories about himself. This habitual pathological lying is another major red flag from Bendall's early life. Another big problem in Bendall's life was drugs. He started using cocaine and heroin when he was a teenager, which gave him the push to start committing crimes for the money to afford his habit. On April 20th, 2010, the police found cocaine on him and gave him a warning. But this didn't stop him. Just a few weeks later, on June 3, 2010, Bendall attacked an Asian man who was walking alone on the street. When the man tried to defend himself, Bendall mercilessly beat him up and stole his things. According to a report, this beating had left the man unconscious. The level of force he used was described as excessive and beyond what was needed to simply rob him. Bendall was just enjoying being extremely violent. The victim remembered Bendall saying racist things while hitting him over and over again before he passed out. Bendall was arrested, and on June 30th, 2011, he was sent to prison for 3 years. Unsurprisingly, this wouldn't be the last time Bendall ends up behind bars. After getting out of prison in August 2012, Bendall seemed to stay out of trouble with the police for a while. But this doesn't mean he had changed for good. We now know that during this time he had started abusing a woman. During their time together, she was too afraid to tell anyone about what she was suffering because she thought Bendall might kill her if he found out. But he couldn't stay out of trouble for long. On June 7, 2015, he went into a news shop in Swindon run by a 62-year-old man named Narendra Patel. Narendra remembered Bendall acting strange, walking back and forth in the shop and looking out the window a lot. Bendall made some phone calls and bought some cold drinks. Suddenly, he flashed a 6-inch knife at the counter and demanded the victim give him money and cigarettes. Fortunately, Narendra had a golf club behind the counter for protection, and he tried to hit Bendall with it. But Bendall ducked and then ran away. The police started looking for Bendall, but he turned himself in before they could catch him. On August 21, 2015, he was sent to prison again for 3 more years. While in prison, Bendall's violent behavior got even worse. In early 2016, his request to move to a different prison was rejected. This made him so angry that for months he planned how to get back at the prison staff. On May 10, 2016, he attacked a prison officer so badly that he was knocked out and had to have surgery. 2 other officers who tried to help were also hurt by Bendall's uncontrollable fury. While he was in prison, his ex-partner told the probation service about how dangerous he was. She made a request for him to be prevented from contacting her and asked to know his release date and whether she could obtain a restraining order. 2 days after this, her new partner also contacted probation services and said that more should be done to protect her. The victim was terrorized by the thought that he would come after her when he got out. Bendall was let out of prison on October 31, 2018. But he behaved poorly and didn't follow the terms of his release. He drank alcohol on the approved premises where he was staying, missed curfew, and didn't do what he was told. So, on November 28, 2018, he was sent back to prison. He stayed there until August 9, 2019, when he was released again without probation supervision. During this time, he hinted to his probation officer that he met a woman he wanted to live with at the end of his sentence. The worst was yet to come. After Bendall got out of prison again, his deviance only grew worse. He grew a sexual interest in children. In May 2020, the police in Wiltshire were told that Bendall was trying to get close to a 16-year-old girl who was in foster care. The police wanted to warn him to keep away from the teenager, but he had escaped by then. He had allegedly moved on, trying to start sexual relationships with even younger girls who were in similar situations. The police feared Bendall could start abusing them, so he was classified as high risk. The police told the probation service about this, but later on, this information wasn't used when it should have been. This gross negligence from the probation service was widely condemned later. For now, this shows how dangerous people like Bendall can be. A lifetime of guiltlessly lying makes them experts at manipulation. With women, Bendall would draw them in by making them feel special, but later show how terrifying he really was. By then, it was often too late, as the women were under his control and too scared to leave. This is how Bendall started a relationship with Terry Harris, a 35-year-old single mother of 2. They met on a dating website in March 2020. Terry had just broken up with her partner of 14 years, Jason Bennett. Jason was the father of Terry's 2 children, Lacey, who was 11 years old, and John Paul, 13 years old. Terry really liked Bendall, and after only a few months, they started living together in a house in Killamarsh, a village near Sheffield. But as psychopaths often do, Bendall had two ulterior motives for moving in with Terry. First, he could be closer to her and control her more easily. Second, he could avoid the police because they were looking for him. This was because a few months after they met, he set fire to a car he was trying to steal in Swindon while drunk and high on cannabis. Terry, who was unaware of this, really liked Bendall, but her friends and family were worried. Bendall liked to brag about his criminal past and that he was running from the police. A friend of Terry described how Bendall was acting erratically and appeared pumped up, as if he was looking for trouble. Bendall smoked a lot of cannabis, and according to those who knew him, he had two different personalities, depending on whether he had taken drugs. He would brag about fighting with people and talked about how he was a boxer and boasted about the times he had been in jail. In July 2020, Bendall told Terry's mother about a friend's dog who hadn't been well. His friend couldn't afford to take it to the vet, so he had taken a brick and killed the dog by hitting it around the head. When Bendall walked out, Terry had showed her mother his knuckle duster. He also leeched off Terry as he had no interest in working and spent what little money he had on alcohol and drugs. Terry's mother, Angie Smith, thought Bendall was controlling her daughter. She saw that Terry always seemed nervous around Bendall, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Angie said, "She's always been a tomboy, but when she started going with him, it was always tight shorts and low-cut tops. Her hair became bright red. It was as if he was parading her around." Bendall was also stopping Terry from seeing her mom and friends. Angie begged Terry to leave Bendall, but she was in love with him. Terry got pregnant early in the relationship and was very happy about it. But the idea of becoming a father didn't make Bendall's behavior any better. Instead, his behavior grew worse and more abusive. He became very jealous and baselessly accused Terry of cheating on him constantly. Bendall was so irrationally angry that even neighbors could hear his shouting and abuse. Unable to take this awful treatment any longer, Terry began her first steps to get away from Bendall. That's when the situation reached its worst point. In May 2021, the police finally caught up with Bendall. They arrested him for the arson he had committed the year before, and he was taken to court. On the 9th of June, 2021, Bendall was given a suspended prison sentence and a curfew. This meant he didn't have to go to prison right away, but he had to follow certain rules. Shockingly, this abusive man was allowed to go back and live with Terry and her children. Just 3 months later, one of the most horrific crimes in Britain took place.
This was a deeply concerning and appalling case. We found that at every stage of Damien Bendall's supervision by the probation service, from his initial court report to his supervision in the community, the quality of that work was wholly inadequate and far below what was required and what the public have every right to expect, I think. We found both failings amongst individual practice by probation staff and by their line managers, but they reflected a broader issue in the probation service, that they are struggling to properly assess and manage the risks of harm that people on probation may present to the public and to children and to potential partners.
Late in the evening of September 18th, 2021, Bendall was in the house with Terry and her two children, John Paul and Lacey. The children were getting ready for bed. Sadly, there was another child there too. Lacey's best friend, 11-year-old Connie Gent, who had come over for a sleepover. Bendall later said he had been using cocaine for 3 days by this point and was looking to buy more cocaine. We don't know the exact events that led to this, but Bendall took a claw hammer and attacked all 4 people in the house. He brutally hit each person in the head several times with such violence and ferocity that their skulls were smashed in. Each person died in a different room, which shows that when the attack started, everyone ran to try to save themselves. Bendall went from room to room looking for them. There was blood all over the house. What Bendall did next is almost too horrible to believe. After beating 11-year-old Lacey until she was almost dead, he took her into the bedroom where her pregnant mother's body was and molested her. The doctor who examined the bodies later said that Lacey was assaulted after she'd been attacked and while she was dying from her terrible head injuries. After he was done, he applied pressure on her neck to kill her. The last moments of her young life were spent in unbearable agony. After this, Bendel sat with the bodies for several hours. He didn't try to clean up the house at all, but he did change his clothes multiple times. Later, he was seen on camera carrying a bag with John Paul's Xbox game console in it. He took a taxi and traded this game console for cocaine. He was also seen going into a corner shop, where he didn't look upset or worried at all. Remember, this is a man who had just killed 4 people. Their bodies were still lying where he had left them. On his way back, he had told a taxi driver he had been chilling with the family. This is a level of psychopathy that can leave one speechless in horror. About 12 hours after the murders, Bendel finally called the police. He did this so he could tell his version of the story first and try to control the narrative.
Basically, I need the police and the ambulance and that because I've killed 4 people.
Okay, just hold the line.
Bendel also made a weak attempt to self-harm by stabbing himself. He tried to make it look like he was so upset by what he'd done that he tried to end his own life, but it only left superficial stab wounds on his chest and abdomen.
I don't know what happened. Alright, come to me. Mate, have you got anything on you that you shouldn't have? No, there's no weapons or nothing.
Right, do you just want to undo your coat? Have you armed yourself?
Yeah.
He was calm and totally relaxed during the questioning.
Anyone else? Yeah. What have you done? I've murdered 4 people.
He told the officers, "The whole house is covered in blood. I used a hammer. I didn't realize what I'd done. I've murdered 4 people. I don't know why. I blacked out. It was as if I was outside my body." He also made sure to tell them that he'd been using a lot of drugs for the past few days and was so high that he couldn't remember anything. But even while trying to make excuses, this cruel and evil man couldn't help but brag about what he'd done. He said to the officers, "I bet you don't get 4 murders in Killamarsh, do you?" After his arrest, Bendel was charged with 4 counts of murder and 1 count of rape. He tried several tactics to avoid the full consequences of his actions. First, he claimed he was so high on drugs that he couldn't remember killing anyone. He also refused to admit that he had assaulted Lacey. This was probably because he knew how child sex offenders are treated in prison. Bendel offered to plead guilty to manslaughter. This would mean admitting he killed all 4 victims, but saying he didn't plan to do it. The court rejected this offer. It was easy to prove that Bendel was lying. He said he couldn't remember the killings, but he was able to take the game console, go into town, and buy drugs. He also waited many hours before calling for help. When the police arrived, he was calm and detached, acting like he had done something minor. On December 21st, 2021, at Derby Crown Court, Bendel knew he couldn't keep lying. He pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and 1 count of rape. That same afternoon, he stood before Mr. Justice Sweeney KC to be sentenced. In a last attempt to get sympathy, Bendel's lawyer said that Bendel was now sorry for what he had done. The judge didn't believe this. In his sentencing remarks, the judge said the murders were brutal, vicious, and cruel. He pointed out that Bendel had killed defenseless children and a woman he claimed to have loved, who was pregnant with his child. Then the judge gave Bendel his sentence. For the murder and rape of 11-year-old Lacey, and for the murders of 13-year-old John Paul, 11-year-old Connie, and 35-year-old Terry, Bendel was given a whole life order. This means he will never be released from prison. Unfortunately, the probation officer who wrote Bendel's report didn't do their job properly. They only listened to what Bendel said, even though Bendel was good at manipulating people and was very dangerous. Instead of checking with anyone else or looking at Bendel's long history of crimes, the officers simply believed his lies. If they had done their due diligence, they would have seen how violent he had been, both in and out of prison. They would have seen warnings about how he treated his partners and that people were worried he might hurt children. Because they didn't do this, they told the court that they thought Bendel wasn't likely to seriously hurt partners or children. They also said Bendel shouldn't go to prison. Instead, they suggested he should have to stay at home with Terry during certain hours, usually at night. He would wear an ankle bracelet to make sure he followed this rule. In a scathing indictment of the state of the service, Peter Neato, the senior coroner for Derby and Derbyshire, said the victims had been failed by overworked, stressed, and inexperienced probation officers. Bendel's case was managed by 2 trainee probation officers with just months of experience between them, and who did not have the experience, qualifications, or training to manage the case, while managers failed to properly supervise. Recording his conclusion for all 4 inquests after hearing 2 weeks of evidence, Mr. Nieto said they were unlawfully killed, but their deaths were contributed to by acts or omissions by the designated state agency for offending management in the course of Damien Bendel's offender supervision and management. The probation service accepted a staggering 51 separate failings at the inquests held at Chesterfield Coroner's Court, and accepted a catalog of missed opportunities and lack of scrutiny concerning Bendel's supervision going back several years. A review found failings at every stage. We'll never know what would have happened if the report had been different. The judge might still have decided not to send Bendel to prison. But the information given to the judge was so wrong that it was careless and dangerous. Angie Smith, Terry's mother, spoke about her overwhelming grief. She lost not only her daughter, her only child, but also her grandchildren. Angie talks about how precious her daughter and grandchildren were to her, and how she would give anything to spend just one more moment with them. Jason Bennett, the father of John Paul and Lacey, said that the murder of his 2 children has destroyed his life. He feels that life now seems pointless, and it's painful to think about the future. He sometimes gets distracted by thoughts of how his children died, reliving the trauma in his mind. Charlie Gent, Connie's father, spoke just 9 days after his daughter was murdered. He described Connie as his best friend, someone who could always make him smile. Charlie also talked about the last day he spent with Connie, saying he remembers how good it felt to hold her and how safe she made him feel. He wanted to be interviewed to urge other parents to value their time with their children, because you never know when it might be the last.
Just a basic PNC check, then, you know, maybe they'd all still be here today. It could have quite easily been prevented. I think the entire system's broken, really broken.
The lingering question is, why did Bendel commit these horrifying murders? Much to the family's dismay, he never explained his motives clearly. Some speculate that it was due to his apprehension on becoming a father, while others say he was abusing Lacey and wanted to keep her quiet. Could drugs be reason enough to lose control like this? Or was this plain psychopathic rage? Another question is whether this was preventable. Could a proper intervention from authorities have potentially saved their lives? What else can be done to reform the system?
At every stage of probation supervision of Damien Bendel, from assessment to the court report to his supervision in the community, the quality of that work by probation was of an unacceptable standard and well below what was required and what the public, I think, have a right to expect.
Born in 1992, Kendrick didn't have the kind of comforts that kids need. Instead of a warm, loving home, the future criminal had to deal with an endless series of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. By the age of 12, Kendrick was already showing signs of extreme mental and physical distress. He weighed just 59 pounds, about 2/3 as much as other boys his age. Later on in life, the culprit would be diagnosed with severe schizophrenia, which might have manifested in him hearing voices and seeing things that weren't there. It's hard to imagine just how scary this was for a 12-year-old, especially one that felt so unsafe in his own home. However, there was one brief ray of hope for Kendrick. His grandfather, Reverend Alan Kendrick, was a well-known pastor at the Oasis of Praise Church in McCalla, Alabama. Once he realized how much the boy was suffering, he was able to get Kendrick out of his abusive home and become his primary caregiver. This escape gave the boy a chance at living a normal life, but as we'll soon reveal, the mental scars left by the abuse weren't going to fade away so easily. He'd been saved from his abusive home, and when his mental health symptoms became too great to ignore, his grandfather took him to a medical professional. The psychiatrist prescribed 9 different antipsychotics to calm Kendrick's stormy mental state, but something happened when he turned 18 that ruined all of his progress. The government suspended his disability benefits. His grandparents just didn't have the money to afford the meds, and without the support of Medicaid, Kendrick had to deal with a disastrous come-down. His symptoms would have started spiraling out of control. His delusions would have become impossible to differentiate from reality. The story of Brandon Allen Kendrick isn't just about one man's violent psychosis. It's also the story of how every single institution failed him and pushed him further along the path to homicide. But for the time being, Kendrick still had a new environment, one that made it seem like a normal life was just around the corner. Despite the sudden Medicaid suspension, life seemed to settle down for Kendrick after he moved into his grandfather's peaceful rural property in West Blockton, Alabama. There was plenty of room for him to run around and act like a kid again, and he had guardians that actually cared about his well-being for a change. On his 13th birthday, Kendrick was even able to go to a restaurant for the very first time. Years went by and the growing teenage boy finally started getting interested in dating girls. Although there is some evidence that things didn't go as well as he'd hoped. When he was 26 years old, he ended up marrying a woman named Kelsey, who was just 18 years old at the time. Though an age gap of 8 years isn't completely out of the ordinary, it's strange that a grown man decided to wed a teenager fresh out of high school. Was Kendrick simply unable to relate to people his own age? Had his childhood trauma somehow stunted his emotional development? We may never know, but the fact that he married someone who had only recently become a legal adult points to something unsettling in his psyche. What's even stranger is that Kendrick and Kels had their first child, Caleb, when she was 18. This seems to suggest that their relationship began when she was even younger. Granted, the age of consent in Alabama is 16 years old, but it's incredibly disturbing to think of a man in his mid-20s trying to romance a high school student. One thing we do know is that Kendrick's mental health problems hadn't gone away. He still had severe schizophrenic episodes, which can potentially cause moments of extreme paranoia. While in those states, Kendrick might have seen everyone as an enemy. He might have thought his own wife was out to get him. Things would only get worse from that point on, but it didn't have to be this way. It's at this point that we should address Kendrick's personal responsibility in the events to come. Even though he'd been taken off Medicaid at 18, he was able to get a new prescription that allowed him to get back on his meds. The only problem was, he often refused to take them. This led to increasingly violent episodes where Kendrick became outright abusive towards his wife and children. Though the abuse never became sexual, it was clear that Kendrick was playing out the physical violence he'd been subjected to as a young boy. As a result of his erratic behavior, Kelsey and Kendrick were allegedly going through a separation. This only made his violent tendencies even worse. He was repeating the cycle, and in 2024, things would reach a bloody climax. On July 18, 2024, Kelsey went out with her 2 children, 6-year-old Caleb and 2-year-old Kinley, to celebrate her nephew Colton Daniels' birthday. Colton was turning 9 years old, but his parents weren't able to take him or his 6-year-old sister Haley out to celebrate. This was because his mother, 35-year-old Jessica Morrow, was having a major surgery the next day. She had to prepare for the invasive procedure, so she asked their Aunt Kelsey to take them out and show them a good time. Due to his unpredictable behavior, Kendrick wasn't really involved in any of the festivities. Instead, he stayed at home and stewed in his emotions. A storm was brewing inside of his mind. The pressure of an upcoming separation from his wife was getting to him, and to make matters worse, his schizophrenia had been especially bad over the past 2 weeks. At 7 p.m. that evening, Kelsey got a call from Kendrick. He seemed absolutely furious about something, though she couldn't understand what exactly his problem was. All she knew was that he was demanding that she come home immediately. Since Kelsey had promised to take care of Colton and Haley while their parents prepared for the next day's surgery, she had no choice but to bring them along as well. Now, Kendrick's spiraling mental state hadn't gone unnoticed. In fact, things were so bad that his grandfather had a feeling that Kendrick would snap and do something horrific. He didn't know what it could be. All he knew was that his grandson needed help fast. He'd even called the police earlier that day, telling them that he had a bad feeling about his grandson's intentions. The police could have stepped in and stopped all of the bloodshed that followed, but they simply ignored the pastor's plea for help. At around 9 p.m., 2 hours after Kendrick forced Kelsey to come home, the Reverend held a prayer meeting where he asked God to help his wayward grandson. After the police had washed their hands of the matter, it was the only option he had left. The minutes ticked by, and no one knew just how much devastation was about to be unleashed. Once the prayer meeting was over, things seemed more or less normal. Kelsey had come home, but because she and Kendrick lived in a garage apartment isolated from the main property, the Reverend couldn't tell if something violent was going on. Indeed, when he spoke to his grandson, he actually felt like there was no cause for alarm. This was because Kendrick seemed to be behaving calmly. The Reverend and his wife, Gay Kendrick, had a lovely chat with their grandson, talking to him about all sorts of things. What they didn't know was that Kendrick's mind was consumed with thoughts of unstoppable violence. It's possible that even Kendrick didn't know what was going on in his own head, because the Reverend reported that he was laughing while talking to them. Moments later, Kelsey entered the room as well. Despite the stress of having to come home in such a rush, she seemed to be in good spirits. She was laughing and talking with the rest of them, as if they all lived a normal, happy life where nothing ever went wrong. Eventually, Kelsey got up and returned to her garage apartment. 10 minutes later, Kendrick got up and joined her, still all smiles from the conversation he just shared with his grandparents. That's when the Reverend and his wife heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire. The thunderous bangs of bullets firing sent a shock down the Reverend's spine. He turned to his wife and asked her if she'd heard it too. Though it was impossible for the roaring explosions to be anything but gunfire, the Reverend was still hoping beyond all hope that he was mistaken. Unfortunately, his assumption was correct, and his wife confirmed it. They had no idea what to do. Should they get up and enter the war zone, where they might get shot themselves? Do they call the police and effectively sentence their adopted child to a life behind bars? As it turns out, that choice was taken away from them when Kendrick returned to their room. He still had the 9mm pistol in his hands, but for some reason, he seemed completely disoriented. It was as though he had no idea what he'd just done. Seeing him coming in, the grandparents showed incredible bravery. Gay was the first to act, grabbing the gun while Kendrick was still holding on to it. This led to a shot going off, but by some miracle, it completely missed Gay. Once his wife had wrested the gun out of Kendrick's hands, the pastor launched himself at his grandson. Kendrick came tumbling to the ground with his grandfather on top of him, and he seemed to think that he was the one being wronged. No. Where am I at? Where's Kelsey? Poppy, why are you angry? What did I do wrong? Said Kendrick, referring to his grandfather with the same term of endearment he'd used as a child. When the Reverend told him what happened, Kendrick replied with a dull, emotionless, "Oh." Did Kendrick really not know what he'd just done in that moment? His grandparents still weren't certain, at least not until they ventured into the garage apartment to see for themselves. What they saw there would haunt them for the rest of their lives. 5 bodies lay strewn across the floor. One of them belonged to Kelsey, the girl that became a mother at an age when most girls want to go to college, the girl that had only recently been trying to escape her abuser. As for the other bodies, they clearly belonged to the 4 children that had been there at the time. Colton was slayed on his 9th birthday, as was his 6-year-old cousin Caleb. Kendrick had shot his firstborn son right in the head and left him there to die. He did the same with his infant daughter Kinley, who was all of 2 years old at the time. She had likely just been learning how to walk and talk. The people around her had no idea that those first tentative steps would also be her last. Kelsey and each of the children had a single bullet to the head. If the narrative constructed by police is true, Kendrick acted with intent, with purpose. He allegedly knew what he was doing, and he didn't seem to be acting in a fit of rage either. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to manage the precision of multiple successive headshots. Only one of the 5 victims was alive, 6-year-old Haley. As the grandparents shakily informed the authorities of what had just happened, they noticed that she was still breathing. An ambulance arrived at the scene alongside police officers, and Haley was rushed to a nearby hospital. Unfortunately, she succumbed to her injuries not long after. This brought the total death count of Kendrick's massacre to 5. It was one of the worst mass homicides that the quiet Alabama county had ever seen, and it happened in the home of one of the community's most respected members. And the perpetrator might not have been in his senses when he committed this unthinkable act. After calling the police, the Reverend called Bill Morrow, Kelsey's grandfather. He gave him the bad news. Kels and the kids had all been shot in the head. By the time Bill reached the Kendrick residence, the police had already sealed it off as a crime scene. Kendrick was arrested in the early hours of July 19th. With the homicide weapon still lying nearby, complete with Kendrick's fingerprints on them, it was basically an open and shut case. Due to the overwhelming evidence against him, he was held without bond at the Bibb County Jail, where he waited formal charges and a trial. On July 22nd, he was brought to the Bibb County Courthouse, where he once again seemed like he didn't quite know where he was. But he clearly knew that his freedom was on the line. When the judge asked him the question, Kendrick submitted a plea of not guilty by reason of mental illness. This might have been a strategy suggested by his lawyer, but it nevertheless shows that Kendrick was capable of telling right from wrong. Despite the pastor's assertions that Kendrick had been spiraling for a while, the neighbors told a different story. Cameron May, who lived right next door to the Kendricks, said that Kendrick seemed perfectly normal in the lead up to the incident. After skipping out on church for a while, he'd apparently started going again, indicating that he was trying to get closer to God. May spoke about meeting Kendrick at the local Dollar General, where he went about his grocery shopping without a care in the world. Could there really have been a homicidal impulse hidden behind that calm, cheerful demeanor? Was the shooting premeditated, or did Kendrick decide to do it in the spur of the moment? And regardless of that, where did this desire to slay his own wife and children come from in the first place? These are all questions that authorities are struggling to answer, and chances are they won't find these answers anytime soon. With the next court date set for the 26th of September, we'll just have to wait and see what other evidence comes to light. Maybe the story will start to make sense once the prosecutors lay it out in front of a judge, or maybe it'll just make matters all the more confusing. But one thing's for sure, a family was destroyed that night, and the people left behind will have to deal with that loss for the rest of their days. What do you think of this case? Do you think Kendrick will get the sentence he deserves? Or will the judge give him a pass because of his mental illness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Take care, and see you in the next one.